Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto.
In a world on the brink of disruption, two men will bring you clarity by interviewing some of the most intelligent and influential names in the blockchain world. Welcome to Show Me the Crypto with your hosts, Wade Patterson and Ulf Lonergan.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Show Me the Crypto. My name is Wade Patterson.
And I'm Ulf Lonergan.
We're a couple of friends from Canada who love learning about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and we're happy you're along for the ride. Whether you're a crypto virgin or you know your way around the block, we hope our episodes with some of the most interesting and influential people in the blockchain space help deliver you with value. And on this episode, we're joined by Hailey Lennon, partner at Anderson Kill Law Firm and founder of Crypto Connect. With early career plans of being a traditional corporate litigation attorney, Hailey quickly realized that wasn't the path for her. Her career pivot and simultaneous discovery of crypto has led her to provide regulatory counsel for Silvergate Bank, Bitflyer, and Coinbase, while also being a regular contributor to Forbes. According to Coinbound agency, Hailey is, and I quote, probably crypto Twitter's most prominent legal member. Hailey, welcome to Show Me the Crypto.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on. And we were joking before we hit the record button how Ulf and I know so little about the legal framework and everything going on. So this is going to be a real treat for us. And before we get into some of the crypto sides of things, I want to know, kind of going back to your experience, what was that moment when you began to understand that traditional corporate litigation wasn't for you?
Pretty quickly. So I thought I wanted to go into big law. I graduated from the University of San Diego, joined Gordon and Reese, which is a well-known U.S. law firm. And pretty much when I hit my 1 year mark and knew I had that on my resume, I said bye. And part of that was that I really wanted to move in-house, but I was told all along throughout law school, that companies are looking for much more senior attorneys to be in-house counsel roles. But I found a company in San Diego that was kind of a family-owned business that did traditional currency exchange. So along the Mexico border, doing exchange for people that are needing to, deposit their checks into pesos or into dollars while crossing the Mexico border. And so the company I worked for did wholesale currency exchange, meaning they went to those little exchange centers, took the $1 million, took it to a bank, converted it to pesos, and brought back those pesos the next day. So it was like armored car and everything. So that was sort of when I got into that role. I realized how interested I was in financial crime prevention, a lot of the same traditional financial problems we have in the crypto space. So that was sort of like my aha moment of, okay, I want to focus on financial technology and financial crimes, anti-money laundering. And then it just kind of, evolved from there.
And so you stumbled upon Bitcoin 8 or 9 years ago or so. And, at that time when you first heard of it, I guess, did it click right away? Did you look into it right away? Or was it kind of like something you heard of but didn't really get into for a while yet?
Yeah, it didn't click right away. So actually, my boyfriend at the time was super into it. And that would have been like 2011, 2012. And he was kind of talking my ear off and he was buying it. And at first, I just sort of thought, probably the same impression as like when I was younger about video games, just like I didn't get it. I didn't understand. It seemed more like sort of like a hobby or some mythical thing. But then once I was at $X and saw the wholesale currency exchange and started to really understand what crypto was doing, that it was actually like digitizing money, facilitating the transfer of money. And I was all of a sudden looking at these armored cars and these security guards lugging bags of dollars. I was like, what? what are we doing? And so, and then the opportunity with Silvergate came about 2 years after that. And they reached out to me and said, we're looking for someone to develop our crypto banking practice. And it was sort of the first time I had heard it in a professional setting. And I think that's when I really got it, because just, I don't know, for me as an attorney, hearing like a traditional bank talking about the space and then seeing the caliber of the companies that were already in the space, like Kraken, Gemini, Coinbase, that was when I was like, oh, this is an actual industry that's definitely going somewhere, because I just saw how it works in traditional cash, and that's not going to last forever.
Yeah. And so when was it that you got that you went to Silvergate?
So I believe it was 2014, late 2014. Wow. And so Silvergate came to me and said, and I already kind of understood that banks would be an issue for crypto companies, because I already had the framework of anti-money laundering concerns in mind. I knew that cannabis companies had trouble getting bank accounts. So like I could understand why crypto companies were having trouble. But Silvergate came to me and said, we're banking the largest crypto exchange in the US, and we know why we're comfortable with it. We know why we're comfortable even giving them a trading account and actually touching their customers' funds, but we don't have a repeatable process for this to analyze like who is to the caliber and maturity level of their compliance programs that we could bank them and then explain it to our own regulator. So it was a pretty cool transition and a really sort of just perfect opportunity, because as soon as I started there, I was just like, okay, I'm never working outside of crypto. Like, this is it for me.
Presumably you still had a lot of learning to do at that point. No, like that must have been a interesting role to now be put in, where you had to like learn all this information and be able to translate it and mediate it. Is that the case? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I think for like any young attorney, law school doesn't really prepare you to be a lawyer. It teaches you like the law, and it kind of prepares you to take the bar, and you might learn some like legal writing skills and debate skills. But I mean, I found that all of my jobs, especially in crypto, have had definitely a learning curve. And I remember at Silvergate, like back then, Bitcoin was really the only coin we were talking about. So we weren't yet talking about like securities law analysis and what's a security and what's not and all of that. But we already had like framework from FinCEN, which is the regulator that oversees any sort of like money services businesses or money transmitters. And they had pretty recently, before I joined, put out guidance saying, okay, a user of Bitcoin is not a money service business. An exchange is. So if you're an exchange, you need to have an anti-money laundering program. So I remember kind of like reading that and then thinking through what are the things that I would be concerned about as a regulator if I saw that a company was banking these companies. And so I kind of made like a risk matrix of the different types of crypto companies there are, the different types of bank accounts they could want, and then made the procedure from there. But it was a lot of learning. And I had a great team supporting me at Silvergate. And I remember even interfacing with our IT team and trying to understand some of like the different technology sides of these companies, like connecting into other sort of IT providers, or how we should be thinking about the cybersecurity. Like from a banking perspective, a lot of it's reputational risk, right? Like if Silvergate's banking an exchange and they lose customer funds, or they have a huge customer support issue and it makes like headline news, it might impact the bank directly, like if there's fraud involved or something. But for the most part, it's just like, you don't want to be in that article with that company saying, and they're banked by this company. So it was a lot of like weighing the reputational risk, but then also understanding like at the time, like who was who was trying to do the state by state money transmitter licenses that we have here in the US. Eventually the New York bit license became a area who, if they were using Chainalysis or Elliptic for transaction monitoring. So there was just sort of things that I remember kind of rattling off as like, okay, this is our procedure. We're going to look at that stuff.
One of the things I've heard you say in a few of the other interviews that you've been on is basically speaking to regulators and trying to get them to understand why you can't use old regulations to govern a new technology. Have those conversations gotten easier over time, or is it just a constant ongoing battle?
It gets easier with one regulator, and then you sort of start over with another one, I would say. But in sort of regulators' defense, I do think that most regulators are getting more informed about the technology. You don't need to start with like 101 about what Bitcoin is and how it works. And so, last year we were getting here in the US, like getting guidance from the OCC that like national banks could hold cryptocurrency and validate nodes and things like that. And I think that was led, in part by Brian Brooks, who was there at the time, former chief legal officer of Coinbase. But I have seen a lot of progress with regulators in general, and I think that no regulator wants to be on the side of approving something too soon and then having it become a big issue or a big consumer protection concern. But I think most are also don't want to look like the regulator that's holding it all back.
Yeah, 100%. And do you notice, does this kind of go in waves? So, I mean, from an average person's attention in terms of the crypto space, we have these natural kind of what has happened historically, these 4-year bull and bear cycles. And when the price is going up, a lot more people are paying attention. And is that kind of your experience in terms of regulators' involvement is during a bull cycle that there's a lot more of those conversations happening?
I think it depends on the regulator. So some regulators, especially like I mentioned, that are more on the consumer protection side, or at least that's sort of their mission and mandate. Those regulators, I think, get their ears perk up more when more money is flowing in, because that means more consumers are coming in that might get harmed. But when it comes to a regulator like FinCEN, that's just there to like prevent money laundering, that's like a day-to-day battle. And so that doesn't increase. But I think what happens, the more we have these ebbs and flows, though, I think regulators and like government and policy people start to think, wow, this really isn't going anywhere. You know what I mean? Like maybe the first few times the price dropped, they were like, oh,
maybe it's going away.
We told you that was going to happen. You made your fast money. But after a few times and like more institutional investors getting in, more companies getting in, the regulation maturing and the industry still booming, I think regulators are like, okay, like now we need to like figure out how to it's not going away. So let's hire some people to figure it out even better. So yeah.
On that note of like regulators and everything we've been discussing so far is generally related to the US, but as I understand, you worked for Bitflyer, they're headquartered in Japan. So do you have any understanding around, regulation in different countries and how that varies from place to place in regards to?
High level, I do. My time at Bitflyer definitely exposed me a lot to the Japanese market. In Japan, they're fortunate, and it may be a little more similar to Canada, although I'm not as familiar. But in Japan, they sort of have one central federal regulator. And so a struggle that companies have here in the US is that they need to get 50 state money transmitter licenses. Then they have the New York bit license and New York DFS. There's FinCEN on the federal level, OFAC, SEC, CFTC. Like there's just pressure coming from so many different people that, it's really a lot of companies. I probably you'd be surprised to hear like usually at one point in time have a different state regulator like in their office at all times, because once you get the licenses, then you get examined, right? Like, so even if so there's just like a big lift. Whereas in Japan and other countries, there's more centralized sort of regulation of the space, right, or not much regulation at all, right, which helps innovation thrive. It also helps scams thrive a little bit more when there's not. In Japan, the FSA regulates the space, I would say pretty fairly, but I think the unfortunate thing is when you only have one regulator, what they say goes, right? Yeah. And so Japan's been very aggressive in not supporting exchanges having privacy coins. So whereas in the US, like you could launch your privacy coin in 49 states, but not New York unless you get New York sign off. In Japan, it's just sort of a no-go. So there's sort of pros and cons of both. But and then interestingly enough, the last Forbes article I just wrote, I pointed out that we can't get a Bitcoin ETF, a Bitcoin spot ETF here in the United States, but Canada's had it for quite some time. So yeah, there's definitely examples of different countries maybe being able to launch more innovative and new projects faster than we can here in the US. Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe dive into that recent article a little bit and talk to the Bitcoin ETF challenges?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much what my article was saying and what some other attorneys recently made an argument about is that in the US, the CFTC and the SEC have signed off and agreed to have companies launch future ETFs. And they did that in part by getting comfortable with the methodology that an exchange like a CME uses to determine the pricing methodology of Bitcoin. But the SEC keeps denying these Bitcoin spot ETFs because they say that companies haven't yet demonstrated that they can prevent market manipulation and fraud. Pretty much that people that the regular consumers that the SEC is supposed to protect can't access the spot Bitcoin ETF without the SEC being sure that there's no market manipulation going on. But it seems to be some contradiction there because the way in which the price is determined for futures is based on the same methodology. So I think it's a matter of time, but I had some interesting conversations with the former chairman of the CFTC and some of these ETF projects that have been trying to get their Bitcoin spot ETF approved. And, it's just another example of sometimes regulators don't give the real reason that something's delayed or denied. They say sort of what they can point to on paper or sometimes nothing at all. And that can be frustrating for companies trying to operate.
So in this scenario, are you insinuating there is another reason? And what would that reason be, your speculation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're justifiably pointing to that requirement that there be a prevention of market manipulation, but I don't think that they're being clear on what it is yet these exchanges haven't done to ensure that. You can't just sort of arbitrarily continue to point to that, right, and have it not be an objective standard and then just keep saying, no, you haven't met that arbitrary threshold yet. I mean, I also do think I always think there are political reasons at play. Like in the article, I mentioned that Elizabeth Warren has been very vocal in the US about not liking Bitcoin, about wanting the SEC to look closer at cryptocurrencies and stable coins. And so, I think that there's a bit of political reasons behind it as well that sort of doing what they think other leaders want to be done.
Speaking of your contributions and articles on Forbes, I was reading through a couple and then I was bummed out because I caught the headline of one that was basically about NFTs complex legal status. And I clicked on it and Forbes was like, you're out of free articles. I was like, no. So what was the...
Sometimes I get that paywall and I'm like, I wrote this article. What is this? How do I get rid of this?
But regarding that, I mean, why? Like, I was genuinely really curious. What did you dive into in that one?
Yeah, well, I'll be happy to PDF it and email it to you. But
we won't tell Forbes.
So in that, so like you mentioned at the beginning, I work at Anderson Kill. It's a law firm here in the U.S. specialized. We have a really strong practice. Preston Byrne, Stephen Pally are two of my other partners. All three of us very active on ship posting on Twitter. So in the last, few months, we've just had this like wave of inbounds of NFT clients, because that's sort of the new exciting thing that people are getting into. And some of these projects just have really interesting questions that come along with them. So my Forbes article touched on some of the intellectual property questions that arise, like what IP rights did the person have to begin with, and how to best transfer those rights to a new, to the owner of the NFT. Also talked a bit about how certain products right now, like, there are more centralized exchanges that are allowing NFTs to be offered on their platform, of Circle's an example. And there's a kind of a question there of, so there's a rule here under OFAC that you're not allowed to facilitate a transaction on behalf of anyone on the SDN, like terrorist list. It's sort of you can't do business with a terrorist. It's like, this is a very simple way to say it. You can't do business with a company owned by someone related to terrorist organization, a boat, a wallet address even. They have some wallet addresses listed. And so, a lot of these NFT platforms are offering NFTs without doing any KYC on the front end, which arguably should be okay. They're not money services businesses. They're not, transmitting money. But there's a question there about ensuring that the individual purchasing an NFT isn't doing it for money laundering reasons or isn't somehow connected to terrorist financing. And the third aspect I touched on is that there's an argument that could be made, and not that I want it to be made, but that, NFT projects need to be aware of avoiding securities land. So anytime you have something that involves the investment of money in a common enterprise with the idea that efforts will increase the value for that holder, you arguably can have an investment contract. That's very simple. That's like simplifying the Howey Test. It's much more complicated than that. But my article just was discussing how there's a way in which an NFT could be created in a way that it could be, considered an investment contract by the SEC if the SEC wanted to do so. So, some of my articles are sort of, I'm very careful to be like very objective and not be like the scary lawyer that's like, oh no, everything, you can't do this. Like, because I love this space. I don't ever want to tell projects no, but part of my Forbes articles and the work I do in the space is like pointing out the landmines, like don't do it that way, do it this way, so that those things don't become problems.
Ulf, do you realize our audience has been either watching or listening to this episode for 20 minutes?
20 minutes? No, they should probably subscribe.
Yeah, they should subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you comment and turn on notifications. And if you're listening to this podcast, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and a review.
We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. So go check out the episode description. You can find all that information below. And we have an update on the NFT, don't we?
That's right. We didn't previously mention this, but this NFT for OG supporter is a one of one. There will only be one of this kind ever minted, and we have a few surprises for the person who purchases it. The link is in the episode description.
And back to the episode.
So speaking about NFTs, Hailey, it just seems like there's so many interesting questions that spawn from what you were just talking about. One that I've often wondered about is things like copyright infringement. I'll give you a really quick example. There's a project, and we had the early founder on. His name's Travis Uhrig, and he's behind Curio Cards, which is like one of the first NFT projects. It's a 2017 project that I think was like around the time of CryptoPunks. And there's these 30 different original cards, but like some of them straight up basically use like the Heineken logo and like different things like that. And I just wonder about like things like copyright infringement. Are those issues that are coming your way or that you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, that's why we always start with what rights do you have to give in this NFT? Because it's not like you don't call something an NFT and all of a sudden not have to comply with basic copyright laws. Like the person that does own that thing likely can come after you for using it without their permission. So, often talking about that, we get a lot of questions too about sort of the best way to frame the continued use of an NFT or royalties for the resale of an NFT down the line. So that's kind of interesting. And then we're also just starting to have these really like NFTs I never would have thought of. For example, I heard of this project a few weeks ago that's working with celebrity chefs and like NFTing recipes. A lot of people I've spoken with, not for legal representation, are looking at NFTs more as sort of like, because they're non-fungible, like individual memberships to things. So you were joking earlier about the Forbes paywall. Like there's a world in which you could have an NFT that sort of granted you access through different journals, paywalls, and things like that. So the world of NFTs, I think, is just getting started. But yeah, it brings up a lot of really interesting questions. And I'm not a IP lawyer, but we have IP lawyers at our firm. So a lot of times we're pulling in these IP lawyers who have kind of seen it all in the traditional world, and now they're like dealing with it in our crazy cyber world.
Yeah, totally. One of the things that has caused me a lot of, I guess, question marks and frustration, because I want to be, above board with everything, but when it comes to taxes, right? And how to handle that. And so I'll give you one example. How I got into this space originally, there was a website called Steam It, and you could post blog content there, and content that was popular on the site would get upvoted and rewarded with the cryptocurrency called Steam. So that was kind of like my first cryptocurrency, and then I went from there. So there's just so many things like even the way you earned that currency and how that's, or like you think about like airdrops and like just all of these different aspects. And in your opinion, is the current kind of tax laws, I know the States is different than Canada, but is it simple enough for the average person to kind of understand, or like where do you think that needs to go?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, like no taxes are simple enough for people to understand. So we'll start there. But with crypto, the thing that frustrates me as a user of crypto and as an attorney is sometimes regulators define cryptocurrency in different ways that best suits them. So in the US, FinCEN regulates it as money. So it's the equivalent of dollars, and you need anti-money laundering program, blah, blah, blah. But then you revert over to the IRS, which is under the same Department of the Treasury as FinCEN. So they're like under the same roof. And the IRS in the US considers cryptocurrency as property. So then it's taxed as capital gains. Well, that's convenient for the IRS and for, but like, where does that actually, and then you go to the CFTC and it's a commodity. So it gets confusing fast. And things like airdrops. I mean, none of the regulations were written, like you said earlier, with any of this stuff in mind. And certainly when someone gets given something with, like I don't know if it still works like this, but I remember there being airdrops where people like, I don't even think wanted the coin. You know what I mean? Like they sort of it just like appeared in their wallet. So things like that and staking, some of the interest bearing products we're seeing. I mean, there's not enough clarity. And, CPAs are like attorneys now. They're probably have a lot of job security from all the crypto users that are like, what do I do each year? But it's unfortunate, I think. I mean, I will say that companies, including exchanges, have done a good job. Like now you can kind of export all your trading activity. But for me, like when I see that, I have no idea what that actually means on paper.
That's what I was going to just actually say as a follow-up question here is like, okay, so it's like you get all that, you gather all your information around all your trades and coins you bought and airdrops and staking rewards and liquidity rewards and all this stuff. And it's like, what do you actually do with that? Like, is there any actual laws that, even if you knew it all inside and out, like, is there a real, hey, here's how to do this the right way? Or is that just does that not exist yet?
I mean, I think it does. Like, I'm not a tax attorney either. I'm using a CPA this year because I want to do it the right way, but I'm confused too. I mean, there is ways to calculate when you got the fair market value of when you got a coin, when you transferred it to another coin, or when you sold it, and like the capital gains tax on that. But for me, like I don't, it gets confusing when you're trading a crypto for another crypto and then you're not actually realizing those gains yet. So I mean, I'm sure a lot of people need help in that area, and including myself.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, hopefully I don't know, becomes simpler one day at the very least.
It's funny because I was talking to not my accountant, but an accountant friend of mine and explaining. So earlier this year, I got a little bit into NFTs, and one of the NFTs I purchased was a Gary Vaynerchuk project. He has VFriends and the gift goat. And so like the premise of this NFT is that you get 18 gifts over the next 3 years. And so I was explaining this to this accountant and he's just like shaking his head. He's like, I don't understand your world. Like this is just, but one thing.
Yeah, I liked it.
Sorry. One thing I want to ask you about really quickly that you referenced earlier was the Howey Test. I've loosely heard that in the past, but what is that exactly?
So it's a 4-pronged test that came from case law from decades and decades ago. The case was about an orange grove, and it was trying to determine if the way this orange grove was divided would constitute an investment contract. Because an investment contract is a type of security that the SEC regulates. And so fast forward now to today, the SEC has said that same test, the Howey test, applies to cryptocurrencies. And that's how you decide if a cryptocurrency is a commodity under the CFTC and you can freely list it as an exchange, or if it's a security and regulated by the SEC. And so the product itself is an unregistered security, and the exchanges that list it need to be registered as broker dealers. None of them are. So it's a 4-pronged test, and it's similar to what I said earlier. Like it's the idea of that there's an investment of money in a common enterprise where the efforts of a third party will increase the value of that initial investment. So it's a pretty easy test to fail. Like you have to check all 4 prongs, but if you do, you're a security. And I think different attorneys have different stances on this, but for the most part, my law firm takes a pretty conservative approach and feels like the way the law is written right now makes it pretty difficult for a project to put a token out into circulation, pre-mined, keep some for themselves, have people start investing, buying that token. When it goes on a secondary market, the price shoots up, and the 20 to 50% the project kept skyrockets in value too. Like that is very much the area that the SEC wants to regulate, unfortunately, in the US. So the Howey test is that 4-pronged test. And it causes projects a lot of trouble here.
Yeah, no doubt. I've heard around how a crypto business, so that your new crypto project, you're going to create your own whatever. I think this is in line with trying to avoid probably failing that test. Is that I'm probably going to get this so wrong, but they would like form an organization and then create their project and launch their coin, but in a way where like they're safe because they're in the organization. The organization didn't launch the coin, the community launched the coin or something along those lines. And then it's like decentralized enough to say, oh, well, we didn't do it. We just created the technology to do it. And then the community launched it. So you can't go after anyone unless you're going to go after everyone. Is that right? Have you heard of that? Am I explaining that kind of right?
Yeah, you are. I mean, so there's a few things there. There are companies that will try or do like, they incorporate somewhere like that have less strict laws, and then they sort of do the mainnet launch and then tokens live, and they really try to separate themselves from the project. For the most part, we haven't seen that tested, but I have concerns about that in terms of if the SEC, I mean, it's sort of what is the SEC going to buy, right? And so if you're like, I didn't do anything, and they're like subpoenaing you and seeing all of this collaboration to get the project off the ground, you're probably going to still have a problem. What I've heard more that I think is more likely to be successful is when a project is launching really in a fair manner where they just start mining the token along with everyone else who can, and they don't keep any for themselves. Right. And they really are just sort of a participant in the network, and they really are just that.
Gotcha.
But when you have a founding team sort of keep a lot of the tokens projects for themselves, and benefit from that more so than the everyday user, I think the SEC looks at that and says you had more of a responsibility than the everyday user.
That makes sense.
One of the topics, and again, I'm sure this isn't like your specific sphere of expertise, but even if you're able to speak to it on a somewhat high level, so one of the things we've just started to dive in on a few recent episodes is the concept of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and it just makes me wonder, like, that concept as it becomes more popular and that kind of thing, do you see any legal implications or things that maybe are being overlooked right now of, whether it's a product that the DAO is putting out that ends up harming someone in the future, like who's responsible? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I would just leave it very broad that I don't think the ecosystem has figured out the right extreme of decentralization to really make it a whole different thing. But there, we have in Wyoming, I think they accept DAOs as legitimate entities in their under their rules. From a legal perspective, I more think of the questions like, how would a law firm represent a DAO? Who would the conflict check be against? Who would, if the bill wasn't paid, who would you go after? So some of those questions to me are a little more interesting. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's really interesting things that we're seeing in terms of how governance can function with this new technology, and like governance tokens and smart contracts being written into things. So, I mean, I think everything that's happening is really neat. I think it's just still maturing.
It's so fascinating to me that it almost seems like the juxtaposition of like being super into crypto, but like the legal side of it. I think that's why, I don't know, you're just such an asset in this industry of like the fact that you have this knowledge, but you're also you're on team crypto as well, which is appreciated, right?
Very, yeah. No, thank you. I mean, I think that like passion for people involved in the space, and then bringing in whatever their level of expertise in just helps the industry continue to grow. And I mean, you'd be surprised. Like, you can have conversations like this with regulators, and you're like, oh, you're actually team Bitcoin. I can tell. That doesn't mean they don't have a job to do, and don't have keeping someone out of trouble is usually the job of a regulator or a lawyer. But yeah, I mean, in my opinion, like, once you go down the rabbit hole and like really see what this space is all about, and then like get into crypto Twitter and get to know the people involved, like, it's just such an amazing group of people and such a amazing creation, like Bitcoin in general. So yeah, but there's a juxtaposition of that sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. And so kind of speaking along those lines, transitioning into something you founded this year, which is Crypto Connect, which just seems like such a cool concept. But for our audience members listening or watching this, do you mind just kind of breaking down what is Crypto Connect and why did you think it was important to come up with?
Yeah, thanks. So I launched Crypto Connect earlier this year, a few months ago. It's a women-led organization, but it's an organization open to everyone. So, I was hearing a lot of like rumbles about needing more women in crypto. And it was starting to actually frustrate me, because I was like, I know some really badass women in this space. Like, maybe people need to get to know who's here already, and also, yeah, of course, like any sort of diversity is important in crypto. Every background, every gender, every race, every, even financial income level, I think needs to feel welcomed here. But so I started having conversations with some of my contacts in the space. At the same time, I was starting to travel again a lot for work, just like sort of the business development side of being a partner at a law firm. I wanted to go meet with potential clients. And everywhere I went, I was just like kind of frustrated, because I felt like I was having to do a lot of Googling, like, what are the Bitcoin meetups in Nashville? What companies are in Nashville? Who lives here? And even like just tweeting out to like, my followers, like, hey, I'll be in Nashville next week. Who's there? For one, that's not great for like personal security reasons. And also it just didn't seem very efficient. And so the goal of Crypto Connect is to sort of be an umbrella organization. We launched in 12 different cities, and we're launching in 12 different more next quarter. Nice. Canada's on the list.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out the territories and who should be involved and how it should work. Would love to talk with you all offline about that a bit more. But anyway, so yeah, we launched in those 12 major US cities. Our goal is to do quarterly meetups, and then also we're still working on it, but have our website be a really helpful full resource for anyone who's a part of Crypto Connect when they're traveling for work or moving somewhere, to like sort of immediately be able to ping into that community there. And so, we launched in sort of the typical New York, DC, San Francisco, LA, Dallas, Austin, Denver, Seattle, a bunch of places. And we hosted our first 12 meetups this quarter, and they were all like so well received. And just, like I said, the events are open to everyone. So it was co-ed, just some really neat, like educational panels we put on, and just like networking stuff. So I've been like really, really excited by by how it's been like received by the industry. And eventually I hope it really does operate as a decentralized organization where, because I've already had inbound from like Switzerland, Australia, Kenya. Wow. It's been amazing, but eventually I'd love there to be some sort of way where people can come to me and say, I want to open the Boston chapter. And then they can go running with that and make the meetups what they want and that sort of thing. So I'm super excited. Yeah,
that'd be awesome. I love the vision for where it could go. Can you tell us a little bit about for someone who hasn't been to a Crypto Connect event, how do they go, and are they different in the different areas? Do they all follow the same sort of structure and agenda, or is it more casual and laid back?
Yeah, so this quarter was our first round of 12 events. So we're still we're learning with people who are attending. I mean, the biggest thing I was excited for was that the turnout was so great. I mean, we had about 50 to 100 people in all 12 cities at each event.
Nice.
A few were slightly smaller, but just really good turnout, and also sort of pinging into those Bitcoin and crypto meetups that already exist in those cities, because we're not looking to like replace those. We're looking to supplement, and I do think that like having female leadership, I think the second layer impact is that there happen to be more women at some of these events than other events I've attended, which is great. So this first round was very much just very casual meetup style. Every city was different. So like I tried to attend a few of them. I couldn't attend all, but so for example, DC was sort of more white tablecloth, buttoned up. We had some former regulators that attended, but it was, also law students and people from the Hill and just people interested in the space. Then I went to the LA one. It was more of like a brewery outdoors, very casual, some pizza slices, some pints of beer. So they all have their own sort of identity. And then I think like as those chapters grow, each city has a female lead. And when we expand next year, there'll be leads that are men and women in these other cities we're launching in. And so those leads can kind of take the lead and get to know their chapters and say, have an email list and say, what are the things you're interested in doing, or partner with those Bitcoin meetups that already exist in those cities, and sort of sponsor. I mean, I've told the different leads, like, if there's a Bitcoin author that happens to be in town, like time your meetup then, or if you can do a fireside chat with someone who just announced some big news, do that. So our goal is to have educational parts of the meetups, not just have them be happy hours. And then our biggest goal is like late next year to try to throw an actual conference, whether we haven't decided. So we'll see if it's the way it sort of happened. We built this group and organization really quick. It launched and has had a lot of success and interest. So I think we can do it, but we'll see if we get there by the end of next year.
Nice. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I love it. And all of the leads in the different cities. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, some badass women in the space. So were you kind of like actively reaching out to those people? And then I guess the next question is on the expansion concept. Were those all people that saw the initial and then they came to you?
Yeah. So most of the women that are on the board of Crypto Connect, I've known through the years, and I didn't include them because they're women. I included them because they were people that I thought immediately when I started to think of like good connection people. Like Aubrey Strobel is the chief marketing officer of Lolly. She's our New York lead, and she was always there for like to grab a cup of coffee or dinner when I was in New York to introduce me to other people. So just sort of like people that bring people into the fold was what I was focused on. Some of the other individuals that are involved in our board were sort of word of mouth that other people recommended or suggested. So for most of the expansion, it has been people through Twitter or email reaching out and saying, I'd like to lead this, or people recommending others. So and I also had kind of created in my mind like a second round of launched cities. So there's been a few where I've tweeted, looking for someone in Detroit who could lead this chapter, and just sort of trying to get those recommendations and words, just sort of like recommendations of the best people to get involved. Pretty much just people who are probably busy and have a lot of stuff on their plate, but are still willing to prioritize something like this. That really the goal is just bringing more people into the fold.
All right, Hailey. Well, this has been such a good conversation. We've learned so much about things that we were not knowledgeable on with regard to the legal framework. We like to end every episode of Show Me the Crypto with the same 3 questions we ask every guest. It's a section that we call You Had Me at Crypto. Ulf's going to ask you those questions.
All right. Ready? All right. The first question is, who is your favorite person to follow in the crypto space?
Good one. Let's see. I mean, I'm biased, but I really like Brian Brooks. He was, like I mentioned, the chief legal officer of Coinbase, and he tends to have some pretty big sort of announcements and regulatory updates. There's a bunch of podcasts I like in this space, but I would say maybe Brian.
Cool. Mm-hmm. All right. Second question. What will the price of Bitcoin be 10 years from now?
10 years. Let's see. Well, it'll either have dropped back down to 3K or it'll be at 3 million. No, let's see. I'm going to guess, in 10 years. 10 years. I'm going to guess 1.5 million.
Okay. Nice.
I like it.
Yeah, I like it. I like that you said 3K, by the way, instead of 0. It was like, no, it's not going to 0, but it could go to 3K.
Maybe. Yeah.
By the way, that answer, I like that answer because that is, so the very common answer that we get is 1 million. That is like most guests have said that. 1.5, that's up there. That's in like the top, I'd say 5 or something like that. So I like it. I like the aggressiveness.
Yeah, or higher.
Yeah.
All right. Third question. What is the most underrated coin or project in crypto?
I guess what first came to my mind is privacy coins. I've held Zcash for a really long time, and not that the price necessarily represents the potential of a project, but I think that people undervalue privacy coins because some people still have the misconception that Bitcoin is anonymous and private and all of that stuff. I think that it's nice to have a Zcash or Monero type coin that, Zcash sort of gives the optionality, like law enforcement can see the transaction if it needs to through the exchanges, but someone doesn't necessarily get to know everything about my balance and transactions like some other coins. I also really like basic attention token. I think it's cool that, like, I've always been frustrated that stuff like Mark Zuckerberg gets to make a bunch of money off me on Facebook because he knows everything about me, and then he gets to sell my information to marketers, and then I have to see their like ridiculous like advertisements. I like that basic attention token tries to like take that out and change sort of the way that works.
Cool. Yeah, no, with privacy coins, I was thinking, like, is it that people don't know, or I believe over the last year, there's been like a few scares too around like, well, if as an investor, I'm holding this because I believe in it, is that like safe because they're getting banned and things like that, right? From exchanges. Yeah. So who knows? Yeah,
they're getting delisted often. I mean, and I actually wrote a Forbes article about this too, that like, New York and certain areas that want to approve token by token, even like New York that made some advancements where you don't now need to go to them for a token by token approval like you used to, but that doesn't apply if the coin has anything to do with privacy or gambling. So for those coins, a Coinbase or a Gemini still has to go to them and say, we want to list this and explain why and get their approval.
Awesome. Well, Hailey, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining Ulf and I on this episode of Show Me the Crypto.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Nice to talk to you guys.
Thank you for listening to Show Me the Crypto. Please make sure to subscribe as well as rate and review this podcast.